Yeah. All right, back at you. Video 2, day 1, talking about Mr. Franz Kafka. Kafka's life, very uneventful. Middle-class Jewish families from a town called Prague, Czechoslovakia. Family is Jewish. Grew up in the old Jewish ghetto area, meaning where they were allowed to live. Dad, successful merchant, kind of aggressive, outgoing, boisterous personality. Mom, totally different, very inward, introverted, we would say now, maybe. Kind of family's a little bit more like classy, like she's grew up better off. And Kafka takes after her side of things. He has her personality more, and he hates his dad, resents his dad, and a lot of the things we're talking about in here, in these main ideas in Kafka, they all can kind of be related back to his relationship with his father. And he wrote this very famous letter to his father that was never sent, that goes over all these like instances of abuse and neglect as a kid. Most of them are not, criminal, but they had a fraught, complicated, difficult relationship, to say the least. Kafka grows up to be a lawyer. He's a pretty good lawyer. He's worked in insurance, worked in banks. He's credited with developing the hard hat for construction projects. Pretty smart idea for the insurance industry. Save some money, make some more money. Okay, the main themes now, though. Let's talk about these. So these are some, I'm sort of calling this from different people and places. So I won't bore you with where I've gotten these themes from, but alienation. This is a feeling that really we all have when we hit adolescence. That feeling that things aren't quite right, you don't fit in, you don't belong. You stop seeing your parents as sort of like the people who can do everything for you and answer all your questions, but at the same time, you don't know who else is going to do that for you, so you feel kind of turned off. And then it's just a feeling that you don't belong, that the world is kind of against you, and that you're sort of an outsider, or in this case, an alien. And the isolation, the loneliness that sort of sets in, and that is always there in the human psyche. It's part of our freedom and our liberty to have that privacy, to have that. But there's also extended Kafka where he's thinking it's going too far. If you want a modern instance of alienation that's not so dark, just think about walking around Queensborough campus. And I have to credit, students have a lot of personality there. They will be talking to each other, but often you'll see groups of young people these days, and even older people may be worse with their phones. They're standing around by each other, but they're all just looking at their screens. So they're together, but they're alone. And they're alone predominantly with the sort of idiotic pleasure of the device. So whatever you're absent-mindedly, mindlessly scrolling through, it's sort of like a social safety blanket, but it's causing alienation. And again, this shows up all over, but you'll see, especially in the story we're reading, the Metamorphosis, Gregor is totally isolated and alienated. And again, the quarantine right now is a perfect example of this. We sort of need this alienation right now, but it gives you some vivid illustration of what it's really like to be sort of a depressed and isolated person normally, which I'm not. But I'm starting to feel that way just from sitting around so much in my farm. Okay, the criticism of authority, again, this goes back to his dad, but it's also part of his left-wing politics. Kafka would have been aware of political developments in places like Russia, generally aware of communism and anarchism, and he tended towards, although he went to work in business and stuff out of obligation to his family and necessity to work, he was a lifelong person on the political left, more or less, and he was what you'd call an anarchist. He rejected all forms of authority, really as not because they were unjustified outside of their own self-dealing. He felt that political power is based in violence ultimately, and that the law, as he says in one of his famous short kind of philosophical stories called The Problems of the Law, the secret of the law is that there's no reason for it other than it's what the nobles do. The law is what the rich and powerful simply do, and we are forced to suffer. And it's an old classical saying in the Thucydides' history of the Peloponnesian Wars. The strong do as they like, and the weak suffer as they must. And that's really Kafka's criticism, is almost this classical one, that the strong do as they like, and the weak suffer as they must. And you can spare me all your constitutional law and your morals and ethics. Look, at the end of the day, who's getting the bailout right now? It's not the people who need it. It's the rich and the powerful. They're printing money and handing out trillions and trillions of dollars, going into banks, going into the last group of people that desperately needs it. Okay, they're cutting the wages of illegal farm workers. The people are picking the food that's going on the table. They're keeping people locked up in prisons on the border just to score points and sort of show Trump's power. Okay, which is part of his appeal. People like that he may not be wrong, he may not be right, but he's forceful and he's direct and he's powerful. Okay, and that's what power is, according to Kafka. That's what authority is to Kafka. It's not there based on merit or justice. It's there based on the shrewd, bold, often violent actions of powerful people. Okay, and then thirdly, tradition and modern life intermingling. This is an idea I take from a dude named Walter Benjamin in one of his essays on Kafka. Benjamin says that Kafka's work. You guys know what an ellipse is, right? It's like an orbit that's not a perfect circle. It's sort of bent, and then so it's not perfectly round. It's sort of flattened, but still orbiting, and it's because it has two centers of gravity. So there's two centers of gravity in Kafka's work. Benjamin says tradition and modern. Traditional life and modern life are coinciding, and you see that. For example, in the story we're reading, something strange and almost miraculous, like we think of in traditional life, people really believe in miracles, okay? If you take religion literally, you have to believe in miracles. There's a miracle. It's a dark one. It's a horrible one at the beginning of the metamorphosis, but he's transformed into this bug. How does it happen? No explanation. It's done almost just by divine bad luck in the life lottery. And but then the whole rest of the circumstances in the story after that have to do with not divinity and miracles, but just, okay, that one thing has changed, but the rest of his life is the same. So the very first thing he thinks about, even though he's been transformed into this disgusting bug creature, the very first thing he thinks about is, oh my God, I overslept. I got to get to work. He starts, and then he can't because he's like strapped. He's stuck on his back like a turtle that's flipped over and can't get back on its belly. He's stuck on his back, and so then he starts to think like, God, my job is so terrible. So it has this realism, and that's an alienation too. That's a classic alienation. I'm lucky I don't find my job terrible. But so many people do, and I've had them, believe me. The idea of alienation in a terrible job. And then finally, as you see me laughing periodically throughout these videos, there's a really underappreciated part of Kafka is his sense of humor, and it's a dark one. It's gallows humor. It's joking about death. It's joking about sex. It's joking about physical disabilities. It's joking about things we're not supposed to joke about, okay? It's not politically correct what Kafka's up to in his sense of humor, and a beautiful illustration of that is what I was just talking about, that beginning of the book where he's like, what the hell, I'm a bug, but also what the hell, and even worse, I'm late for work. It's like, you can't go to work like this. But we're so programmed to fear. The anxiety of losing your job and everything is so built into us because we have so few basic economic rights if we're not working, that that we right to live in fear of being late to work. Okay, so um, those are the four main themes in Kafka: alienation, feeling alone, feeling outside, feeling isolated, feeling like you don't fit in. Criticism of authority. Authority is just power. It's not justified. It's violence. It's people bullying, for example. Okay, bullying. His dad was a bully. Tradition, and then it's the third thing, the intermingling of tradition and modernity, traditional life and modern life coinciding all the time, and then finally the sense of humor in all this, the black comedy of, although it's not funny at the time when you're waiting in those lines at the DMV or at the registrar at CUNY, as the old cliche says, a comedy is tragedy plus time. So in Kafka, that time is added in, and the tragedy almost always plays as a comedy or something even darker, but not as I don't know, serious in some direct, unironic sense. All right, be back at you in a minute talking about the beginning of the short story, the first of three parts of the story.